Let's switch gears and talk a little gold. The precious metal is having a pretty lackluster year, up about 6%, despite a brief flutter of optimism for gold bugs around the U.S. debt ceiling drama. Prices topped out in May, and gold ETFs have suffered outflows since then. So, Will, some might say inflows into gold have been anemic. I mean, what's really holding gold back?
I think at this stage, it's been this rising sort of yield and dollar strengthening narrative that's really happened over the last month or so. The dollar was very much has been on the back foot really since it peaked last year. And so there was a lot of interest in terms of driving gold up to an almost all-time high again. But that's backed off as dollars started to strengthen a little bit. Yields obviously starting to climb again. So the narrative around gold is reversed, I think, for the medium term. And while the price of gold has really hung in nicely, given where rates are, I think that at the moment it's a little bit of a cause for caution, I think, while the dollar's in this particular stage.
Will, can I ask if there's any crypto component here? I mean, Bitcoin has been rallying, and crypto bulls, of course, like to call it the digital gold. I mean, is Bitcoin drawing any money away from gold buyers?
It's difficult to say. My response would be typically no. And the reason for that is I think that the buyers do tend to be quite different. In other words, a lot of the people that buy gold, they're buying it more for defensive purposes, not for speculative purposes. Contrast that to crypto, including a lot of people that buy crypto, particularly Bitcoin, et cetera, it's because they want to buy it at whatever level this is and think that it's going up quite significantly. So in other words, it's a way to make money, or a vehicle to translate that optimism. Gold is less about that. I think it's more defensive, and therefore, while there's always going to be talk between the two and the positioning between the two, I think in reality there's probably little crossover.
That's a good point. I don't think I've ever heard anyone refer to Bitcoin as a defensive play. Dave, give us your take on gold in the broader markets. It's kind of hard to separate the seasonal weakness from the overvaluation in tech names. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been less interest in gold than we might have expected. I don't think that we're in any kind of a speculative buy or sell regime for gold. We're an accumulation regime. I've talked to a lot of advisors who are sitting there with their 5, 7, 8% gold allocation and are quite happy with that being where it is. The important thing when you're doing something like that is to make sure you focus on expenses. There's no reason to be paying an enormous amount of money for somebody to put gold in a vault. Will's product's very cheap. There's some other cheap products out there as well. So if you're buying gold for a buy and hold investment, an ETF is the right way to do it. If you're using it as a speculative vehicle to try to sort of game against stocks, I'd point out that the correlations between gold and other asset classes are actually pretty high compared to what they've been before. We are back to a world that seems to be trading risk on, risk off as a giant bucket, and it's very difficult to peg gold when you're in that kind of a market.
Well, I want to go back to Bitcoin if I can for just a second before we move on. The SEC actually just delayed a decision on Cathie Wood's proposal for a spot Bitcoin ETF. You have a number of Bitcoin future ETFs out there, but what are the odds that we get a spot Bitcoin ETF by next year?
I gave up on trying to, predict when the SEC would approve or not approve one of these products. I had one, in filing myself right at the beginning, and I think once we got that clear indication from the SEC that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon, we kind of gave up on it. So I think other people will speculate that it's happening soon, et cetera. I don't think there's any real grounds for one way or the other. It will happen if it happens, and if not, it won't.
Dave, do you have any thoughts there on a spot Bitcoin ETF?
Yeah, everything's about the Grayscale lawsuit, which we should be hearing about pretty much any day, and how the SEC loses that. I think they will lose that, but how they lose it and what they do in response to losing the lawsuit from Grayscale is going to determine what happens with a spot Bitcoin ETF. I don't expect we'll have one trading by the end of this year, but I will say I'm more optimistic than I have ever been about the odds of approval.